Kenya's Supreme Court has been delivering its full verdict on why it annulled last month's presidential election results. Deputy Chief Justice Philomena Mwilu says the election was neither transparent nor verifiable. The judge also said the polls were not conducted according to the Constitution and that they could have been hacked, as the opposition claims. Meanwhile, protests against the judiciary are being reported in Nairobi. Some supporters of the ruling party have been protesting in recent days. The court this month ruled that new presidential elections must take place. They are slated for October but could be postponed.
The court issued an order requiring the first respondent to supply the petitioners and the third respondent with all the scanned and transmitted forms 34A and 34B from all the 40,883 polling stations on a read-only basis with the option to copy in soft version. Had the court's order been complied with, it would have unraveled the mysterious puzzle surrounding Forms 34A. Regrettably, according to the information made available to the court by its appointed experts, the first respondent only allowed a read-only access to this information without the option to copy in soft version only 2 hours to the closure of the court proceedings, which never fully happened anyway.
Let's get you more now on that story. I'm joined live from outside Kenya's Supreme Court in Nairobi by CGTN's Robert Nagila. Robert, what's the latest coming out of the Supreme Court and the ruling?
Well, good afternoon, Penina. The judges of the Supreme Court are currently, as we speak, still reading that judgment, explaining basically how they reached the decision to nullify the presidential election on the grounds that there were irregularities and illegalities within that process. Now, right from the get-go, the judges stressed on the fact that an election is not an event but a process. You've got the voting process, you've got the counting and tallying process. So they say that it's not based on just one particular bit of this process itself, and that's why they're stressing that it's not an event and it's a process. But as we speak, the reading is started shortly after 10 a.m. local time, and a lot of it appears to be based on the illegalities and irregularities by the Electoral Commission during that whole process. So that reading is still ongoing, and we will get to know more as soon as they complete that reading. We expect it to take at least another couple of hours or so. Penina?
Robert, there have been protests against the judiciary in recent days. Any trouble today so far?
Absolutely, Penina. We did see those protests yesterday in several parts of the country, including the capital, Nairobi. They were largely peaceful. However, some inflammatory messages from political leaders who had organized those protests. Today, we did see supporters of both the ruling party, Jubilee, and opposition outside the Supreme Court. Now, they converged, and police were forced to use tear gas to disperse them. But right behind me, I'm not sure if you can see that picture, well, we've got members of the opposition gathered there. Festive atmosphere, really, one can describe it. And we also have supporters of the ruling party in other places around the Supreme Court also gathered, waiting for that final moment when the judges finish that reading. Now, we expect them to address us to know the way forward. Penina?
Can you talk us through the key points of the full ruling so far?
Well, Penina, so far from what we've gathered from the readings inside the Supreme Court, they're basically focusing at this particular moment on the illegalities and irregularities within the IEBC. There seems to be a consensus that the IEBC not only did not conduct this election according to the election law, but according to the country's constitution. And this is how they say they arrived at this particular decision. Now, at the moment, they are breaking down how they arrived at this particular decision. And like I said earlier, a lot of it appears to focus on the Electoral Commission and how it conducted this particular poll, with the end result that it failed the integrity test. Penina?
All right, Robert Nagila outside Kenya Supreme Court in Nairobi. Thank you. And as Robert did mention, the Supreme Court here in Kenya giving its full ruling right now on the reasons it annulled the presidential elections. Let's listen into the Chief Justice who's speaking.
Fair, transparent and credible elections. Therefore, whether it be about numbers, whether it be about laws, whether it be about processes, an election must at the end of the day be a true reflection of the will of the people as decreed by the Constitution through its hallowed principles of transparency, credibility, verifiability, accountability, accuracy, and efficiency. It is in this spirit that one must read Article 38 of the Constitution, for it provides in the area that every citizen is free to make political choices which include the right to free, fair, and regular elections based on a universal suffrage and the free expression of the will of the electors. This mother principle must be read and applied together with Articles 81 and 86 of the Constitution. For to read Article 38 in a vacuum and disregard other enabling principles, laws, and practices attendant to elections is to nurture a mirage and an illusion of free will, hence a stillborn democracy. Of such an enterprise, this court must be wary. It is also against this background that we consider the impact of irregularities that characterized the presidential election. At the outset, we must re-emphasize the fact that not every irregularity, not every infraction of the law is enough to nullify an election. Were it to be so, there would be hardly an election in this country, if not in the world, that would withstand judicial scrutiny. The correct approach, therefore, is for a court of law to not only determine whether the election was characterized by irregularities, but whether those irregularities were of such a nature or of such a magnitude as to have either affected the result of the election or to have negatively impacted the integrity of the election, that no reasonable tribunal would uphold it. In view of the interpretation of Section 83 of the Elections Act that we have rendered, this inquiry about the effect of electoral irregularities and malpractices becomes only necessary where an election court has concluded that non-compliance with the law relating to the election did not offend the principles laid down in the Constitution or in that law. But even where a court has concluded that the election was not conducted in accordance with the principles laid down in the Constitution and the applicable electoral laws, it is good judicial practice for the court to still inquire into the potential effect of any irregularities that may have been noted upon an election. This helps to put the agencies charged with the responsibility of conducting elections on notice. In the impending presidential election, one of the most glaring irregularities that came to the fore was the deployment by the first respondent of prescribed forms that either lacked or had different security features. The first respondent had submitted by way of affidavit and in open court that out of abundance of caution, it had embedded into the prescribed form such impenetrable security features that it was nigh impossible for anyone to tamper with them. The court was also
Kenya's Chief Justice David Maraga talking there about the principles and practices of free, fair and credible elections and saying without those principles, democracy cannot function. Let's take you back to Robert Nagila, who is outside the Supreme Court. So what now, Robert?
Well, Penina, that's the $64 million question. What happens after this judgment has finally been read out and complete? Well, we've already had from the from the Director of Public Prosecution, saying that he will prosecute those found culpable in this process. He had earlier said that he was awaiting this judgment. We also know that from the other stakeholders, from the opposition, they're eagerly awaiting this particular judgment to be read out so that they can announce their next steps. Now, we've had from opposition leader Raila Odinga, and he has come out and said very clearly that they will make sure that there will be no election conducted in Kenya on the dates given out by the Electoral Commission until their demands to clean up the Electoral Commission and anyone else who was responsible or culpable during this process are not in the picture. We've had from the ruling party, President Uhuru Kenyatta, saying that the election must continue and will be held by the IEBC. At this particular moment, you've got the ruling party hitting out at the judiciary, including the president and his deputy, and you've got the opposition hitting out at the Electoral Commission. So both institutions are in a lot of trouble from the political stakeholders at this particular moment. Now, there are questions as to whether that election will be held on the date subscribed by the Electoral Commission, October 17th, or whether the election will take place at all. As far as the opposition is concerned, it will not until all its demands have been met. Whereas the ruling party, the president's party, says that that election will continue, and if the opposition are not ready, then they should just say so. So that's where we are at the moment, uncharted territory, and we await for further direction from these political stakeholders and from the judiciary as well. Penina?
All right, Robert Nagila for us live in Nairobi. Thank you.